Wow, so I guess we're back with another tier list. This is going to be post Darkwing Blast. So I'm finally back in the Yu-Gi-Oh game, and I feel like I have a pretty good handle on how the meta is going to be. So to start off with Sky Strikers now, they do get a little bit better when Mavens comes out. I put them, I'd say high rogue, low tier 2. The power level of decks has gone up quite a bit. And Runic pretty much does power creep Sky Strikers, but it doesn't mean Sky Strikers is bad. It just means that there's a better variant of it, so it's like, why play it? But I do think it's still a good deck. When Mavens comes out, we'll see if that has enough difference or not. Really, time will tell. But definitely still a very good deck. Mystic Mindburn, at the moment, I'll say it's non-meta. Everyone's prepared for it. Runic Sprite being one of the best decks as well means that it's just not an effective strategy by itself, because there's just a lot of decks with back row removal and such. Now, as a card, it's still really good, but I wouldn't base a whole strategy around Mystic Mine. You'll get clapped. So Sprite and all Sprite variants, I'd say it's tier 1. I think Tier Elements is stronger, and I think the best variant of Sprite is probably Runic Sprite right now. Again, once Mavens comes out, it'll be hard to see if that stays as the best variant, but it's definitely the best variant right now. And I think you've got the Live Twin Sprite, you've got Tri-Brigade Sprite. Those variants are all good. They're just not as good as Runic in my opinion. I think the sheer amount of utility that Runic Sprite brings out just makes it very, very hard to deal with for most decks. And so definitely a strong tier 1 deck. And I would really say that, yeah, Tier and Sprite as the tier 1 decks are head and shoulders above everything else. Trust me, I don't think anything's really close to them. Dragon Link, I would say is high tier 2. Bestials really did give a nice little kind of utility engine from Dragon Link, and it helped support them. Losing Chaos Ruler and all of that stuff is quite bad for Dragon Link, but now that they have the Bestials that can search starters and double as hand traps, and also the Bestial Trap and Spell and Trap continuous or whatever, their internal synergy with dragons in themselves is also very nice, because you contribute things off like your spheres to trigger its effect and all of that, and pop a card, which is great. So yeah, in general, Dragon Link is in a pretty good position. I don't think it's one of the best decks, but I definitely think high tier 2. So, well, let me rephrase that. It's one of the best decks. It's not necessarily best deck of the format, but high tier 2 is fair. So yeah, Runic. Now this is more pure Runic variants as opposed to Runic Sprite, and I'd say pure Runic and stuff like that, it's good. I'd say low tier 2. The problem with pure Runic as opposed to mixing it with something like Sprite is that the win con of decking someone out is not as effective, and if your opponent has 3 Cosmic Cyclones, you will probably eventually lose, especially as cards like Evening and stuff are just blowouts against the Sprite deck. But it is still a good little mini engine. Don't think it's the best, but I still do think it deserves its place in the meta. Sun Avalon Rika, in my opinion, it's a high rogue deck. The problem with Sun Avalon and Rika essentially is that while it does have some interesting interactions and such, the board it puts out is just not that impressive, really. It had the advantage before in that you had a really strong player in all the Disciples playing it, and then on top of that, people didn't know how to play against it, and so the combination of those two, and also smart deck building choices like Rivalry and stuff, allowed the deck to really kind of sweep and destroy people. However, I don't think that's going to be the case moving forward, and I think even if it does win, again, it's going to be more down to a very strong pilot than the deck itself being good. So low tier 2, maybe high rogue, I think about the same. Actually, I'll put in low tier 2 just because I think it's head and shoulders above Sky Striker, but I don't think it's an amazingly powerful deck. Sword Soul I think is actually quite good. Low tier 2. The thing about Sword Soul is, firstly, it doesn't lose hard to Shifter, and it doesn't lose super hard. Sword Soul telling you, of course, it doesn't lose super hard to Dweller. Dweller hurts it a lot, but doesn't lose super hard to it. But then also it can play cards like Rivalry, and so one of the kind of counters to all of these like uncapped combo decks at the top is playing cards like Rivalry and just shutting them down and playing this kind of slower, more control-y play style. And Sword Soul can do that. Vishuda is also a very good card that lets Sword Soul out virtually any floodgate, which is also great. So yeah, I definitely think it's a very good strategy. And also, Bestials being in the format means that if you're a light or a dark deck, you do have some inherent disadvantages against a lot of cards. Well, Sword Soul doesn't really play lights, doesn't really play darks. They play Ecclesia, and some of their synchros and stuff might be lights or darks, I don't even know, I can't remember off the top of my head, but in general, their deck is using other attributes, and this is really, really good for the Sword Soul strategy, because it means they don't hard lose to Bestials, other than like Vishuda and Ashuna, which is a bit annoying, but remember, you have to have a card on board first, so you can do things like Ashuna from the hand before even using it, before getting it engraved or whatever. even having the ability to do that in Sword Salt is definitely going to be very, very useful to play around those Bastille cards. So yeah, I do think Sword Salt has a bit of potential in the format. Virtual World I actually think is one to watch. I think Virtual World is a very, very good deck. I think that the issue with Virtual World is always the fact that it loses super hard to itself. But I mean, the Punk engine is great in Virtual World. It doesn't really have bad matchups against both of the top decks, I would say. Like, it doesn't have an amazing matchup against them, but it definitely doesn't hard lose to those decks. Has a really good Tier Element matchup, surprisingly enough, because Shenshen is just a hard card for Tier Element to deal with. And then on top of that, another really great thing about Virtual World is that it has inbuilt back row removal in Chuche. I mean, back row removal and recursion in one card is just really, really great, and Virtual World having that is nice. So I definitely think it's definitely one to watch. I think it's probably going to settle around mid to low tier 2, but you never know. Virtual World, I feel like it always does top every now and then. We just see it because it does have a lot of potential. Labyrinth is mid to low rogue. It's a good deck. It's probably the best trap deck we have right now. And it doesn't lose to the Bastilles. That's what I'd say as well. However, the problem with Labyrinth is while it doesn't directly lose to Bastilles, when I play a trap deck, my idea is that I don't want to hard lose to certain floodgates. I don't want to hard lose to things like Shift and all of that. Labyrinth, in my opinion, does hard lose to a lot of these monster heavy cards, these monster negates and such, and these hand traps. And that's my problem with Labyrinth. While it's a great deck, and when it gets going, it's amazing, it's quite monster reliant. And having a monster reliant trap deck, it's almost like, why am I even playing it? I might as well just play a combo deck in that situation. So that's what I think the big weakness of Labyrinth is. So I still do think it's probably the best trap deck we have right now, but I think the fact that it's so monster heavy is what's going to hold it back, because it doesn't hold a candle to these fast monster decks, and then with the other trap decks it doesn't have the same advantages of them of being able to ignore monster effects. Madolche is another one to watch. So we did see in the OCG some Vernalizer, and I didn't put Vernalizer on this list, but I'm actually, Vernalizer also counts. I didn't put Vernalizer and Naturia on this list, but those are also ones that I would have said are to watch as well, and Madolche as well. Vernalizer has some really, really interesting synergies with some Earth decks, essentially letting them do things like put barrier statues up for free. It has really good synergy with Fenrir, obviously, because Fenrir is Earth, so you can summon a Fenrir from your graveyard. And just letting you search and dump cards for free, which is really, really great. So I definitely think these are one to watches. They will probably settle around mid to low rogue, but you never know, they could snatch up a win. And again, this is a format where if you're a deck that doesn't use light or dark monsters a lot, you're in a good position, because the Bastilles, people will be playing Bastilles in their main deck, and if you're not using those, you have huge advantages. You also want to be a deck that doesn't rely on the graveyard though, so that's the disadvantage with the Vernalizer cards. They do rely on the graveyard, and everyone's already got graveyard hate at the moment, but I still do think it's really, really worth trying. Then moving on, Drytron. Drytron's hard to say, so here's the thing about Drytron. Drytron I'm going to put at the bottom of tier 2 / high rogue. The problem with Drytron is obviously it loses hard to Bastilles. Now that's really, really bad. But the way Drytron works a lot of the time, for example, is that your first ritual summon is going to be something like, you're going to chain Alpha, tributing off a Benton or tributing off a Zeta in your hand. On that first summon or on that first activation, their Bastilles aren't live. Then on the second one, their Bastilles are live, but you've already got one search. And so even if they banish from the graveyard, for example, if you have Alpha Zeta combo, you're still not necessarily lost if they have a Bastille, if you have another extender in your hand. And so because of that, Drytron doesn't super hard lose to Bastilles. Now, I don't think it's nearly as strong as before, but I do think cards like Vanity's Fiend, Vanity's Ruler, I don't know, whichever one that you usually play in Drytron, I do think cards like that are going to be a lot better this format. Another thing that Drytron has that is really, really good in the Runic matchup is Ammo Factor Pain. So Ammo Factor Pain has a really interesting interaction with Runics, where Runics are forced to skip their battle phase, which means they cannot proceed to main phase 2. Because Ammo Factor Pain forces your opponent to skip their main phase 1, if a player has activated a Runic spell on their turn, when you summon Ammo Factor Pain, it's going to go to their turn, they have to immediately skip main phase 1, and then immediately go to the end phase, which is really, really good, because obviously the Runic card is going to skip that battle phase as well. And so just because of that, it makes it a very, very good card in the Runic Sprite matchup, because they have to be very careful. They can't be greedy, otherwise they get turn skipped and they die. So because of that, I do think Drytron has some potential, definitely an interesting deck, but it is a lot weaker. Dinos, mid to low rogue. We're moving away from a format where monsters are having a lot of monsters is enough. And so because of that, Dinos is good in a format that isn't link based, that is monster heavy. Even though we're in a non-link based monster heavy format, there are so many kind of board wipes and stuff like that that every deck's goal really is just to kind of survive and then kill you the next turn. And Dinos hasn't got as good recursion and stuff as these other decks. Gren Marge, I think time has passed. For a while I was putting it in the one to watch because I thought maybe it might do something. It just doesn't seem to be doing it. If you want to play anti-meta, Runic is the way to go. It's just not enough to play Gren Marge and hope to one bang your opponent because it's too easily countered nowadays, unfortunately. So Tri Brigade variants, low, I'd say high rogue actually. Tri Brigade Revolt is still a great card. Tri Brigade Shureg is still a great card. All of this, but fundamentally speaking, they're just not as good as the other decks. Now, if you mix Tri Brigade with Sprite, it's good. But then you start to ask yourself, why not? Why are you putting in Tri Brigade cards? What are they adding extra that that the Sprite cards don't already have, other than Revolt? And you really want to add a bunch of bricks basically just for Revolt. And so that's the problem with Tri Brigade. I do think it's good, but I think it's at the stage now where I'll probably call it high tier rogue as opposed to a tier 2, which is interesting because Tri Brigade didn't actually get many hits. Engines around it got hit, but Tri Brigade itself didn't really receive any hits. It just kind of got power gripped. Flunder is definitely going to be high tier 2. It's just great. It has good matchups against pretty much every deck in the format. Runic is not good into Flunder because even though Runic does have a lot of utility to mess up Flunder, Runic banishing Flunder's cards means that you have a chance of, for example, essentially searching some of their little monsters for them, allowing them to kind of pop off when they shouldn't. And then also Flunder can main deck cards like Dimension Shifter. They have that stupid win condition, Harpy's Featherstorm still. I don't know why Konami hasn't hit that. And just all of that put together make me really think that Flunder is a great pick. I think probably out of every deck on this list, I think Flunder's probably the one I would recommend. I don't know why I keep recommending Flunder to people, but in any case, Flunder's the deck I would recommend out of almost every deck on this list. If you're someone who just wants to go to an event and probably do well, you probably will with Flunder. Very easy to pilot, like not saying that's no skill, but it's just it's a very low skill floor with a relatively high skill ceiling. So easy to pilot, not too expensive, you don't really need an extra deck for it. Good matchups against most decks. You're not going to get kind of bullied out of the game by a lot of other silly strategies as well. Definitely think it's one to look at. Elitch is mid to low tier rogue. So again, Elitch doesn't hard lose to Bestial. So what people have to remember about Bestial cards is that Bestial cards have the effect that says banish a light or dark monster your opponent's grave. However, there are two things that are attached to that. It's a quick effect only if your opponent controls a monster, and also the activation of that Bestial card is it targets the card in activation, so it can be built, it can be stopped. And so because of that, for example, Bestial doesn't hard lose to Elitch because you can play with a level of discipline in Elitch to not get hit by it. Elitch also do have, I think, 2 quick play monster reborns. They have the quick play spell and they have their trap. And so it's not impossible to play around the Bestial cards in Elitch and to not get completely destroyed. And also, if you're playing 37 traps, you have other cards as well to deny your opponent. You can do something as well. Like, one thing that we're definitely going to see is people are going to be playing a lot of Rivalry in the main deck. So keep this in note. If you play Rivalry in the main deck, it's really good against Bestial variants because they put a Bestial on board. Sure. You carry on with your combo, it's been stunned. On their turn, you flip Rivalry. Now, unless they're playing Dragon Link, they're screwed because they're locked into dragons. And so just because of that, I do think cards like Rivalry are going to be great, or Gozen or whatever. And so kind of linked to that, I don't think Elitch is as weak as it could be. However, the problem with being a trap deck right now is that we have a spell and trap engine in the format that is very strong. And even with, I think, Red Reboot or whatever being banned recently, I don't think that's enough to kind of make trap decks just feel free. You're going to be running against people who have Cyclones in the main deck, and if they don't have them in the main deck, they're definitely going to have a crap ton of back row removal in the side deck as well. So yeah, Elitch isn't as good as it could be, unfortunately. Rose Dragon shenanigans, honestly I don't know. I'm gonna put it mid-low rogue, but honestly I have no idea if that deck's still good. I don't think so. I think without Hulk, that deck's just dead now. Exorcist is another kind of mid-tier 2 deck. Now Exorcist is a weird one. In terms of power level, I would actually say it's a mid to low rogue, but it's just got such good matchups right now because we are in a graveyard-centric format, especially against tier. And so because of that, that does bump it up, in my opinion, to kind of mid-tier 2, just because it's got good matchups against the best decks. It will struggle going second, its recursion isn't always the best, it can be really hardcore sniped out as well. A lot of their cards, for example, like they lose to Nibiru sometimes, for example, which is just not nice. You can play around Magnifica, for example. You have something like as simple as Imperm. You Imperm Magnifica, now they have to lose one of their interruptions. Like little things like that definitely do make the deck weaker than it could be, but still another good choice. Salamangreat I think is another one to watch, especially if you're a Cyberse player. And again, Bestials being in the format does mean that cards, decks that aren't light or dark are going to be greater. Salamangreat has always been a good deck. It also has a lot of interruption that's not monster focused, which is also very nice. Now, it has the disadvantage of being a graveyard focused deck, which we don't like graveyard focused decks at the moment because everyone is gunning for tier. But in spite of all that, I do think Salamangreat has a chance. I also think hand traps are going to start seeing a little bit of a resurgence, and so because of that, decks like Salamangreat that can abuse, add Ash to your hand every turn and little things like that are definitely going to be a lot better to try. So I do think Salamangreat's one to watch. Marincess is similar, but I've always thought Marincess is worse than Salamangreat and what's the other one called? Mathmech. And I feel like results show that as well. Marincess just hasn't really topped up much since its initial topping because it's just not as good. Marincess Wave is just not that good a card. Aqua Argonaut is a horrendous negate. I think a Link 4 for 1 spell and trap negate is not worth it. And so because of that, Marincess just isn't as good as the other Cyberburst decks, but it might creep ahead of Mathmech maybe just on the fact again that it's not as light or dark. It's not light or dark focused, and it's not as graveyard focused as Mathmech, I would say. Well, as graveyard reliant as Mathmech. Mathmech, on the other hand, I do think it's going to dip down into Rogue. I do think it's still a good deck. I do think main decking things like Rivalry is going to be great in this, and you can play loads of hand traps so you can defend yourself. But I do think just in general, having to deal with those Bisteel cards is going to be a lot. Also, Tier's power level is getting so high. And one of the things about Mathmech as well is it doesn't play well into back row. And Runic Sprite being the best deck is horrible for Mathmech because if you go first as Mathmech, great. But if you don't go first and you're playing against a deck like Runic Sprite, it's just so hard to keep up. And so yeah, definitely I think that's the biggest issue of Mathmech and why unfortunately I'm going to put it as kind of mid to low Rogue. I'm going to put it mid to low of this tier, and that's going to be kind of top of Rogue. Punk is going to be, I'd say, mid to bottom Rogue as well. Again, it's just a generic combo deck, and all these combo decks now are getting to the stage where, again, the game has advanced. We have decks that are doing so much off 1 or 2 cards and also searching follow-up and also have inbuilt utility. It's not enough to just be a generic combo deck that's going to try and side flock you. That doesn't do enough, and so that's why Punk I think is mid-rogue. I don't think it's interesting. DDD is a buy, don't play that deck, it's bad. TR, best deck of the format by far. I think it's the best deck right now. I think when Magnificent Mavens comes out, it's only going to get better. Yeah, just really good deck. There's really not much to say. I think anything I can say about T, I've already said it. Ignis, unfortunately, as well, is going to be mid to low Rogue. While Arrival is a really good card this format, full comboing into Arrival is harder than it was before, just because of, again, cards like the Bistids, and also because people are still going to be playing Nibiru. What's going to happen is people think don't play Nibiru because of TR, and then so other people are going to realize, oh, people aren't playing Nibiru, I'm just going to play really greedily, and so the really smart players will have Nibiru still in the main all the time and catch people slipping. Every event it happens, guys. The 2 cards you always need to watch out for in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are Nibiru and Mystic Mine. Just always play around them, never not play around them, because it's always a trap. And so because of that, I think it's still going to make Ignis quite weak. If you do get to Arrival, you flat out win a lot of matchups, because even though decks have outs to Arrival, it's not as straightforward. And funnily enough, most decks out to Arrival can be beaten by just having is it Hiyari Danmari? If you keep that card in your hand, essentially you negate the first attack they do and then special summon it on field, and then now you can banish it off field to negate whatever you want to do. So it's actually really easy to play around, but I still don't think Ignis is going to be amazing this format. ABC, I don't know why it's on the list, it's trash. Altergeist gets some support. I don't know if they got it already or if they just got it, but they got, essentially, Altergeist can OTK you now, which is nice, but I don't think it's worth playing. I still think it's terrible. Branded, now this is definitely my biggest one to watch. I think Branded tier is probably the best deck this format, in my opinion. I think that's the best way to play it, at least, and when I say this format, I mean until Magnificent Mavens comes out. I actually think that's a really good deck, and we're just not seeing enough people try it out. But Branded helps circumvent the main weakness of tier, which is that they lose hard to things like Shifter and Dweller. Branded cards don't lose to that, and what's even nice is that while you do lose the D barrier, tier can play in your opponent's turn sometimes, and so the combination of those two for me just gives this deck so much gas. So either pure Branded or Branded tier, I definitely think are decks that you really need to look at. Yeah, incredible strength, really good. And lastly, I know this is at the top of my list, but I left it to the end because I really want to talk about this. This is Draco Slayers, and Draco Slayers I'm actually going to put it as tier 2. Now, this is the thing about Draco Slayers, and this is, look, whenever a new deck comes out, I always make a huge effort to learn the new deck and learn what it can do, because that's the stage where when people aren't expecting it, they're going to misplay, they're not going to know what to hand trap, etc, etc. Now, one of the things about Draco Slayers is it has really, really good win conditions against both of the top decks. Against both Terror Elements and Sprite. Against Sprite, Runic Sprite, you just pop Secret Village, they can't play. Against Terror Elements, you pop Secret Village or you pop Dweller, they can't play. And that's really, really good. And then in addition to that, it has pretty solid matchups against everything else. Bambuku means that Flundereeze is no longer a hugely difficult matchup. It's not using light or darks, which means that it plays very well around the Bestial cards. Even though Exorcist and such can be a bit annoying, because of the nature of pendulums, you're going to be playing these big board breakers in your main deck, which allow you again to destroy decks like Exorcister. And so because of that, I really think, guys, Draco Slayers is an amazing deck right now. I've got Beyond the Pendulum, but this Pendulum, I'm just counting it all as one archetype. Endymion and stuff is not what I'm talking about Draco Slayers, and it's definitely a deck to watch out for. I think it's going to have huge potential moving forward. So yeah, guys, that is my tier list. I'm definitely going to be doing another one in about 2 weeks when Magnificent Mavens comes out. But until then, guys, I'll talk to you all soon. Peace.